Welcome to Lift Up Nations. I'm Robb Leech, and today's episode is Jeffery Deskovic testimony. How are you doing, Jeffery?
I'm great, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into your testimony to hear about your story.
Sure. I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization that I started, the Jeffery Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has as its mission freeing wrongfully convicted people, pursuing policy changes aimed at preventing that. To date, we've freed 15 people, helped pass 3 laws, and another 6 with a national coalition group, It Could Happen to You, which we're part of. I'm an attorney. I have a master's degree in criminal justice. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction causes and reform, and I started the organization because I survived 16 years of wrongful imprisonment from age 17 to 32 for murder and rape, which I didn't commit, prior to being exonerated through DNA testing, which exonerated me and identified the actual perpetrator, who was subsequently arrested and convicted.
Oh, great. So where are you from? Tell us a little bit about that before we get into, before all that.
So I grew up in Peekskill, which is a suburb in Westchester County, New York.
Nice. Thank you for sharing all that. The next thing would be, what did your life look like before Jesus was in it?
Yeah, I grew up. I went to Catholic school. I grew up Catholic. I went to Assumption School from grades 2 through 8, and for a while I was an altar boy.
Okay. Any profound things happened during that time while you were in church, or when you were growing up, that made you lean more into God, Jesus?
Well, I would, yeah. Once I went. Well, we're getting into the story now, but if that's fine with you, it's fine with me.
Yeah. Hey, go ahead.
Yeah. I think I was arrested for a murder and rape, which I didn't commit. I got bailed out, and I turned to religion to deal with that. I mean, it was quite a lot to be charged with a murder and rape you didn't commit at any age, much less to be at age 16. So I definitely did a lot of praying and a lot of believing and clinging to religion, and and time I came to have faith that everything would be okay, which it was, just not in the way that I thought it was going to be okay. I mean, that was not to come to for many, many years later.
So tell us a little bit about how you got accused and what happened at that point in time. I don't want to resurface stuff, but to get people to understand, if they're in that situation, how you dealt with it.
Yes, sure. I was a high school sophomore, and one of my classmates that I barely knew, she was in 2 of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. She was found murdered and raped. She was 15 years old. She was an immigrant from Colombia. She was here in the country for about a year and a half, leading a pretty sheltered life, as I came to learn later. And she was found murdered and raped. Peekskill was a small city, population of approximately 25,000. I mean, I didn't quite think of it that way then, but I realized in hindsight, I kind of was living somewhat of a double life. There was my life after school, there was my life in school. So after school, there was a lot of kids that lived in the apartment complex that I grew up in the surrounding areas, and we would all get together and we would play. And for the most part, whatever I would suggest would usually be what we do. I'm going to swim, I'm going to play basketball, stickball, football, ride bikes, play Monopoly, go to video games, go to the movies, you name it, we did it. I often suggested it, and we usually did it. But that was after school. In school, I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports, and the kids were like a year older than I was also, and I wasn't familiar with them. So I was withdrawn, tight to myself, and I stuck out as being weird to them.
Yeah.
So that came to be a factor in the story, because in the course of the police investigation, the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school. Some of them told the police they might want to talk to me because I didn't quite fit in. And that's what put me on their radar. I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to it. And the police thought that, given that I barely knew the victim, that was suspicious. That was some sort of outward sign that I felt sorry for what I did. So that was a second factor. A third thing is that they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching that. So that's how I got on their radar. Now, in terms of how they arrested me, which is the next point, for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they'd start out talking to me as a suspect, and then when they pushed too hard, they'd become frightened, and I'd want to get away from them. They would switch it up, and Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was developed. So they would say things like, "Well, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time." They'd ask me opinion questions, congratulate me that my opinion was correct. It made me feel important. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that intersected with this good cop, bad cop technique, because in time I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said, "We have some new information in the file. We want to share that with you. That's going to allow you to be even more helpful to us. But first you have to take and pass the polygraph." So the next day, rather than go to a high school, I went to the police station for this test. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother thought that I was in school. They had no idea that anything was wrong, and therefore they did not call around looking for me. Mm-hmm. But they drove me from Peekskill in Westchester County to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County, so 45 minutes away by car. That meant I had no way of leaving on my own. I had no idea of where I was. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. They gave me a 4-page brochure, which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. Mm-hmm. But I figured that, well, I'm there to help the police. What does it matter? Let's just get on with it. The polygraphist himself was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. I had no idea that he was not a civilian. He put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee. Then he attached me to the polygraph machine, and he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me, kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. So he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Mm. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." That really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend came in the room, and he said, "Look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do that anymore. You got to help yourself." Then he said, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I felt in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else did either loomed rather large in my mind. Mm-hmm. There was the possibility of harm. There was this false life preserver he threw. So I made up a story based on the information which he gave me in the course of the interrogation. By the time it was all said and done, I collapsed on the floor in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
Mm. Wow. That's a big trauma to experience at that age.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Now, before I went to trial, results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab. It showed that seminal fluid found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute. The medical examiner the prosecutor got the medical examiner to give a false testimony against me. He originally, let me say it this way. 6 months after doing the original autopsy, once the DNA didn't match me, he suddenly said that he remembered that he forgot that to document medical findings, which he claimed showed that the victim had been promiscuous, which he made that up in order to help the prosecutor overcome the DNA test, because that allowed the prosecutor to argue, well, she was promiscuous, that's why the DNA doesn't match you, and yet you're still guilty. And then he took it to another level, and he mentioned another youth by name that he claimed she had slept with, but he never set the proper foundation. He never called him as a witness. He never asked him to give a DNA sample. He got away with that because the victim's family wasn't coming to court, so they had no idea what was being said about her in the courtroom. And more importantly, my defense lawyer allowed him to get away with it. He rarely came to see me. He was always shutting me up when I told him I was, innocent, what happened in the interrogation room. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession. He never cross-examined the medical examiner. He should have never represented me, because this other youth the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender agency, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. So that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample. That prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. Lastly, in terms of the false confession, he was all over the place. Sometimes he told the jury the confession never happened at all. Other times he argued that it did happen, but it was coerced. And at still other times he was arguing it was a false confession. So, he had to have been standing there with no credibility, just as someone just willing to say anything, just to have their version of events believed. So in the end, I was found guilty of a murder and rape I didn't commit. I was given a 15 to life sentence because I had been charged as an adult and sentenced as one, and I was therefore sent to a men's maximum security prison.
And how when that happened, what was the feeling at that point in time?
Yeah, I felt like my life was over. I had feelings of hopelessness, helplessness. I couldn't believe that actually happened. Half the time I couldn't believe that I was actually in prison, that I had been wrongfully convicted. And I felt depressed, and I felt suicidal. So ultimately what got me out of that is, I again had kind of like a religious revival, because I had kind of lost my faith as a result of being convicted, but through talking with mental health experts and some of the other prisoners, I kind of found my faith again, and latched onto that, and that had a lot to do with how I survived. A lot of people ask me, how did you survive the 16 years? Because ultimately, we're not a legal podcast, so I'm not going to give you all the legal details of it. Let's suffice it to say that I lost 7 appeals. I went to the parole board. I maintained my innocence, and I got denied there. So all told, I did 16 years before I was exonerated through further DNA testing, which identified the actual perpetrator. My charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and the perpetrator was arrested and convicted. But coming back to the point I was in the middle of making, I would say first, second, and last, definitely my belief in God was I would not have made it through. For sure, it gave me a way of understanding who I am, and it prevented me from committing suicide, really. Secondary fact, that's the first, second, and last reason. There are some secondary things, but I kind of make sense of those. Look, these other factors, that's all part of God's overall picture. So, I look at it like, my going to go to the law library. God helps those who help themselves. So I used to go to the law library and study the law so I could be more proactive. I could give suggestions to the lawyer because I didn't trust lawyers to defend me anymore, although I needed one. So I wanted to at least be able to evaluate what was being done on my behalf, which my freedom would be tied to, and then be able to proactively make suggestions. I used to collect articles about other people who were exonerated. I used that for inspiration. I was determined not to turn the time in prison into a total loss. So I availed myself of the educational opportunities that were there. I got GED, got college associates. I completed towards a bachelor's. I learned to type. I did computer repair. I did painting.
Right.
I worked as a teacher's aide twice for a year and a half, helping other prisoners get GED and prepare for that, learn basic reading and writing. Another thing also is, there was another prisoner there that was innocent also, and we used to get named Frank Sterling. We used to get together once every 6 weeks, and we would try to keep each other going morale-wise, don't lose faith, and then, brainstorm of, what the next move was to make. Frank was exonerated by DNA after a couple years after I was doing 18 years in prison. So my only point is, it wasn't that I was naively believing he was innocent just because I happened to be. It's usage. I didn't think about that. I didn't consider that I was doing 15 to life. I figured, well, let me just handle things in an incremental. I just thought I just have to hold on. God just give me the strength to just hold on for another year or two. At which point I was sure that I was going to win my next appeal because I was innocent and I still believed in the system. So that got me through 11 years. And then when the appeals were over, the next thing, the only way back into court, if you can find some new evidence. So I started writing for freedom, writing letters, looking for help for somebody. I couldn't afford to hire an attorney or investigator, hence the letter writing campaign, trying to recruit somebody, and in that, I did write churches, faith-based organizations, large law firms, nonprofits, and again, I didn't give up. And I feel like, the actions I took reinforced my faith that I was going to somehow, some way, get out of there. I don't think one would have worked without the other. Eventually I did wind up in touch with an investigator who connected me to the Innocence Project that got the testing and got me exonerated. But those ways, are, and then really, I feel like God kept me safe. It was extremely dangerous being in prison, first of all, in general, and under any circumstance. Number two, particularly from age 17 to 32. I mean, let's be for real, right? Before I hit 25, 26, what am I going to do in a physical confrontation against a fully formed adult? And then even from 25 forward, I wasn't someone that was running the streets and hustling and fighting was part of a rite of passage. I was a kid from the suburbs, and, I never really was in any real fights to speak of, so God did keep me safe. I always had that fear in the back of my mind. Somebody would discover what I was incarcerated for. There's a vigilante mentality towards people convicted of sex offenses. So look, there were times over the years I did take my lumps, to be sure, but still it wasn't anything like what it could have been. And thank God I've come out. I still have my mind. I wasn't cut. I don't have any scratches. A lot of other people can't say the same. So I feel like, the God's protection, and then putting the right people in my life at the right point in time, even now to this day. From the prisoner that when I first arrived that told me you got to go to the law library, to another one recommending, look, you use your time in prison, go to college. Another person who taught me some, basic things in the legal field so I could do the research and writing, to the letter that I wrote to the investigator, that ended up in the investigator's hands. That advice I got when I was going to parole board, where I knew that they wanted people to say that they want you to say that you're guilty and that you're sorry, and the debate that went on in my head, and somebody counseling me, you got to stick to your guns, don't do it, then to getting the legal help and getting exonerated, and people along the way since then. I mean, the dean of a college lined up a scholarship for me before she even spoke one word to me. I mean, I would have never I foolishly thought I was too old to go to college, finish. Yeah. So that, and another person who gave me a job as a weekly columnist, and another person who taught me how to lobby and how to speak, to a judge, that a conversation, when I was in the hallway, I was about to speak in front of some judges about wrongful conviction topics. I had tried to get into law school many years before that, failed, got a graduate degree instead, and was debating, do I want to try this again, do I not? And the debate was, well, it's 3 hard years of law school, mostly studying things that have nothing to do with what I want to do as a lawyer for young people, but so that versus a doctorate versus just staying. I mean, but a judge convinced me, look, this better than a lot of lawyers, better than some of us, that's why you're here. Well, just get the certification. So I had the key people in place at the key times, and I think free will comes into it all, because it was my decision at each juncture whether to listen to the advice. I could have went the other way. I could have just been angry or bitter like I was the first month, but I realized that was destroying me, and I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I don't think God wants me to be angry or bitter. He wants me to enjoy what I can. He wants me to be the best that I can. So making that decision, and just the key role that played in my mindset and my positivity, and then just not quitting, just not giving up. I know I've talked too low, but I'm sorry. It just
it's all good. It's great. I love hearing your how you experienced it, because a lot of people want to hear that, because there might be people that are listening to this that have the same struggles, and this would help them tremendously, not only hearing your story, but seeing where it came from and how things played out.
So speaking of which, I make sense of everything, like in a it happened to me in what I'm doing in a kaleidoscopic type of way. In other words, I feel like I had to go through that in order to do what I'm doing now. I found my mission in the world, and I, try to help people that are in the same position I was once in, try to prevent what happened to me from happening to others, hence the policy work. I feel so blessed that I've had educational opportunities that many people haven't had. And so I feel a tremendous moral responsibility to do everything I can. And that's why I do this work rather than being off on a beach someplace. I mean, just living a life that consists of a nonstop vacation. I mean, I could do that. I got compensated, but there's no meaning in that. That's not God's purpose for me. I want to walk in a way that God will be, pleased with me. And sometimes I do things, the specifics of which I'll remain silent on, but I do things for people in a less fortunate position, hoping that the blessings will come back, knowing the blessings will come back to me many, many times over. And I just hope that from my example that, other people can do what I did, both specifically and then just in general, in terms of never giving up. But I'm a reflective person, and when I think back at the total arc of my life, I've kind of come up with a formula that can be applied to any walk of life. Look, have a goal, have a realistic plan, meaning you should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, yeah, I can see how this might work. Mm-hmm. Be flexible. Remember, the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. The plan's just how we get there. So if we have to vary the plan a little bit, as long as we're still moving towards the goal, do it. Walk through that door. Don't be afraid of hard work. Okay. I think we have to work really, really hard in order to put ourselves in a position so that a miracle can happen. It's much more likely, I believe, to happen that way rather than it's just going to drop in your lap while you put forth no effort at all.
Correct.
Don't give up. I firmly believe that, and I tell myself that even now to this day, when I can't go on anymore, I say to myself, this might be it right now. This might be the key moment. You might have been on the verge of a breakthrough, but because you quit, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't go on anymore, the spirit is weak, body's weak, I'm going to do it anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. Okay. And then once you cross that bridge, you have to reach back and help people in that same position you were in. If you can do that, it'll be healing, it'll be cathartic, it'll be meaningful, it'll make your It'll make your suffering count for something. You'll be helping, making the world just a little bit better. You have your inner peace, which I feel, and I've seen people. I've seen people do this, people that have been incarcerated and they work with at-risk youth, people that work with homeless population that themselves were once homeless. I've seen women who were, victims of domestic abuse that now help women trying to get out of that situation. I've even seen people that have been sexually trafficked that are now working in nonprofit. One person even started a nonprofit specifically to help people that have been sexually trafficked. So if you've been discriminated, if you faced racism, whatever it is, and things even less than what we're saying, less extreme, like less of a trial, whatever it is, this formula can be applied. And I just want to give a testimony that my belief in God was central in all these things happening, and in the value and validity of applying, this formula. I would love to be a vessel by which many people are inspired to put their issues in perspective, to know that they're not too big for God, they're not too big for you. You're not going to be given a burden greater than you can bear. I did it. You can do it. Don't give up. Follow the formula. Help people in that same position once you cross that bridge.
Awesome. You actually went into what I was going to ask you, like if there's anything you want to leave to people that are watching this podcast, but you already summed that up with pretty much everything you said. So at this time, anything else you want to say to the people that are watching that
I'll just share a little bit of insight. Okay. I won't take much time.
No, you're good.
Okay. So look, my advice, and again, I follow this myself. I don't tell anybody anything that I don't do and I'm not willing to do myself. And that's just a general principle that I think everyone should try to apply. Appreciate the small things. I lost my freedom, for a while, for a long time. But, I have perspective now. I appreciate the small things. I like just feeling the sun on my face. I like feeling fresh air. I like to be outside in the dark. I like being able to travel. I like experiencing new things and new activities and new experience. Just appreciating, the wonder of what the world is, how amazing it is. So I want to, I want to share that, and the importance of trying to live a balanced life, and and having time for friends, for family, of course, for God. I think many of us get caught up in the rat race, and it's all about just getting ahead of the job. But that has its place, but it has to be in its perspective. That the important things are what I mentioned. Wrap everything else, around that. And lastly, I believe that the differences in our positions in life, the differences in money and social economic status, I believe the variation in that is a test. It's the test for each and every one of us to see what will we do, and what is entrusted to us. So I guess a final thought would be, my goal, my dream, which I believe one day will happen. I'll have a chapter of the organization in each state, and ultimately each country. I see this as a worldwide issue in countries where we're not hearing about wrongful conviction or exoneration. It's not that the errors aren't happening. It's not that the injustices aren't happening. It's simply that no one's being exonerated. Nobody's working. No one's digging. So one day I will have that. I believe that I will have it. And, imagine 25,000 people willing to, part with $3 to $5 a month on a recurring basis, just that way to assist innocent people. Who would miss that? But yet, if that many people would be close to $1 million, we would be able to hire additional attorneys, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel, so we can try to free more people, than what we're able to now. We have 13 active cases now. We're at our max. But one day we'll one day we'll have that, and I believe that, I'm going to give myself an amen, as, cheesy as maybe that sounds. I'm going to give myself a clear-cut amen on that, and that's it. Let's all leave legacies behind, keeping in mind always, let's try to live this. Let's try to live our life, whatever it is we have left, in a way that's pleasing, to God. And if you're out there, if you're inspired, you can reach me on the foundation website, www.deskovic.org. I'm on social media, Instagram, Deskovic Foundation, Facebook, Jeffery Deskovic. This is my regular page, my public figure page. I just use as information sharing tool. The foundation's there. Look, 100% of whatever we get, it goes to the mission. This is not about me. I'm free. I doubt I'll ever be wrongfully incarcerated again. This is about the men and women that I couldn't metaphorically forget about. That's what it's about. I work 50, 60 hours a week. I don't get paid. It's a service, but I know we have to have other personnel to assist. So, and those people do need to be able to make their bills. So, we'll be able to expand as the public, as God inspires people, puts in their heart to contribute, to help in other ways by way of networking. Not everything's the monetary component. We'll grow and we'll expand and we'll get more people. We'll get more people home. And one day, I just hope that when long after I'm gone, I hope that the organization is still running strong, and that, my name will continue to be an inspiration for people. And, one of those reasons, hence why being on the podcast today.
Yes. And I love that you came on and told your story. I do ask everybody that comes on to pray over the podcast at the end. I don't know if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I am okay with that. Sure.
Most people are. So
yes,
you want to do that, and then I'll end with my closing announcements.
Yes. Please, God, bless this podcast. Make it go far and wide. Make it be an instrument of healing, of hope, of soothing. May people be inspired by the stories on this podcast, including mine. May people be inspired to help others, help the cause that I'm working for, and many other, worthy causes. Keep us always guided, walking in a way that's pleasing to you. Bless us to make the right decisions, to not be deceived, but instead, move forward in your light, in your love, and on a clear path, in the path of truth, of light. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
And that brings me to my announcements. If you'd like to come on my show or tell a testimony like Jeff, reach out to me at 302-313-6190 or email me at liftupnations@gmail.com. Also, we do live baptisms at our local beach. It's almost time not to be able to do that because it's getting a little too cold. But if you're interested in doing that now or in the spring, reach out to me at 302-313-6190 or liftupnations@gmail.com. And that's being said, thank you, Jeff, for coming on. Beautiful testimony. Hopefully we stay in touch and we can do great things together with helping get exonerated and people that were wrongly accused free. So that being said, thank you guys, and God bless.
God bless. Thank you. I would love that.